New brick. Bricks to build your dream on. Bricks in the same mould as Australia's early days. The New Brick Settlers range. Earthy rich colours fired in kilns to these blends. The New Brick Settlers range. Pioneer bricks from New Brick. Around the world, terracotta roofing tiles have stood the test of time. New Brick terracotta roofing tiles come in so many permanent colours and good-looking shapes. No rust, no fading, no painting. Just good, rich terracotta colours. Time-tested New Brick terracotta roofing tiles.
'84 was a great year for the Essendon Football Club, not least of all for the fact that the Bombers, one of the most popular VFL clubs, had a revival that saw them take out the flag. The Bombers' record now stands at 13 premierships, equal with Collingwood, second only to Carlton, which has 14. Yes, the Blues, 14. The 1984 premiership success gave a new generation of Essendon supporters, for the first time, that unforgettable feeling standing at the MCG with your heart thumping, your eyes watering, and that very big lump in the throat as they cheered their team to victory. Now, older supporters, and of course I'm definitely one of those, have experienced it all before. Many of those who attended the inaugural meeting at Robert McCracken's home were drawn from horse racing and farming families. Names such as W.S. Cox of Moonee Valley Racing Club fame and Dalgetty and young husband of wool-broking fame were present. In the early days, the Essendon home games were played at McCracken's Paddock, now Mercy College, opposite the tram depot in Mount Alexander Road, Flemington. Well, it didn't take long for Essendon to make its mark as a club, and when the Victorian Football Association was formed in 1877, Essendon was there. By 1882, the club had moved its headquarters from Flemington to the East Melbourne Cricket Ground, where there were better facilities. The new ground was near Jollymont Road and Wellington Parade, now taken over by the Jollymont Railway Yards. There was considerable feeling at the time that Essendon should have moved to the Essendon Recreation Reserve. The club, in fact, applied to use the ground that was to belatedly become their home in 1922, but they were turned down on the casting vote of the mayor. As well as a new ground, Essendon had a new uniform. The early colours had been red and black stripes, but now the footballers wore a black jersey with a red sash coming over the left shoulder and red and black hose. It had been the McCracken family who had a profound influence on the early development of the Essendon Football Club. Alex McCracken was the club's first secretary. He later became president. And when the Victorian Football League was later founded, Alex McCracken was the league's first president. Some of the outstanding players: Captain, Alec Dick. Champion fullback, Ned Officer, the man who's reputed to have introduced high marking into Australian football. Charles Pearson, champion ruckman, Charles Tracker Forbes, there's a name, and rover George Vaughton. Pearson, Forbes and Vaughton were all champions of the colony during this time. This was the equivalent of winning a Brownlow medal. But there was one man who was head and shoulders above the others. Albert Thurgood was the first of the Essendon legends. Thurgood joined the club in 1892, and he took the football world by storm in his first year, as the great John Coleman was to do 57 years later. He headed the association goal-kicking list, and during his career was champion of the colony on 3 occasions. Thurgood was in Western Australia when Essendon and 7 other clubs crossed over to join the Victorian Football League in 1897. He was not there when Essendon had the distinction of winning the first league premiership. To win the flag, Essendon had to defeat Melbourne, and in a great spectacle, the final score, Essendon 1 goal, 8 behinds. Melbourne 8 behinds. This score is still the lowest score ever recorded in a finals match. The team was brilliantly led by George Stuckey, and he was ably supported by Todd Collins. 4 years later, Albert Thurgood was back from the West and almost single-handedly pulled off the 1901 Premiership for his team in an amazing individual performance. After 2 premierships in 4 years, there was a 10-year premiership drought at the club. But the drought was finally broken with a vengeance, with back-to-back premierships in 1911 and 1912. Essendon was undoubtedly the new kings of the league at this time. In the lead-up, Essendon had appointed John Worrell as coach. He'd been a dynamic coach at Carlton and taken that club to 3 premierships. Worrell's very name was magic in league circles. During these premiership years, Essendon had some great champions. Players like Dave Smith, who was 1911 captain, Alan Belcher, the 1912 captain, Ernie Cameron, Bill Busbridge, Billy Shewett, and Fred Baring. In the first minutes of the game, Essendon lost brilliant wingman Fred O'Shea, and then in the dying stages, outstanding rover Ernie Cameron was out of action. There were no reserves at this time, so, with 2 men short, Essendon's victory by 4 points must still be one of the greatest performances ever put up by the club. The joy of winning 2 premierships in a row didn't stop the club slumping the next year, and it took another 11 years to recover from the downturn. Essendon, like many other clubs, dropped out of the league in 1916 and 1917 in support of the war effort. But with players such as Percy Ogden, who captained the club during this period, there was a gradual turnaround in performance. In 1922, Essendon took over its present ground in Napier Street, Essendon. It had taken just over 50 years for the club to establish itself at its present headquarters. Before long, supporters were referring to their teams as the Bombers. And before this, they were called the Same Old, a derivation from the words of a song that supporters chanted in English soccer style from the old grandstand at the East Melbourne ground. The move to Essendon heralded another successful period in the history of the club. Essendon revolutionised league football with a team of midgets who became known as the Mosquito Fleet. The distinct feature of this star-studded group clearly was the number of players who averaged a height of 5 foot 5 inches or 156 centimetres in modern parlance. Key players were Charlie Hardy, Rolly Watt, George Shorten, Vince Owen, and Frank Marr. It was the turn of the little men to take over and to start a new fashion. Selectors of other clubs were thrown into confusion. By 1923, there was another premiership side at Essendon. The grand final win against Fitzroy by 17 points was a triumph for the team of mighty midgets. And to emulate the feat of 1911 and 1912, Essendon again won back-to-back flags. But the cost of the 1924 flag was high. Having reached the finals, Essendon had to fight for the flag through a new system of 6 finals. The Premier team was to be the club that had the highest percentage at the conclusion of these games. In this ridiculous situation, Essendon were easily beaten in their last game by Richmond, but they still won the Premiership. If Essendon supporters were shocked by the performance of the team on the playing field, they were completely shattered by what took place in the Essendon dressing rooms and at the club dinner afterwards.
As supporters, we were very upset to learn that fighting took place among our own players at the function that was held after the match. It appeared that they blamed each other for the very bad performance that they carried out on the field, and to make the situation even worse, the whole thing was repeated the following week when Essendon played a charity match against Footscray to decide who would be the championship football team, either the association or the league leaders. On this occasion, Essendon played even worse, and the arguments and dissatisfaction that took place following this match caused our leading player and the player of the year, Tom Fitzmaurice, to get up and walk from the room and never return to play for Essendon again. He transferred to Geelong, where he performed for them the following year.
After the events of 1924, the club lost its well-balanced and blended team. It was a tragedy for Frank Reid, who served 29 years as club secretary, that even he could not dispel the unrest during this black period for the club. During the late 20s, Essendon stayed around the middle of the Premiership list, slumping to wooden spooners in 1933. A player who observed, if I can use that word, this fall was top half forward and centre man Howard Oakey.
In 1928, when I joined Essendon, the club was a very low ebb. And during the next few years to 1933, we finished up second bottom on the list. And I retired in 1934.
It must have been exasperating for the likes of Frank Marr, Garnet Campbell, Norm Beckton, Keith Forbes, and Len Webster, who'd captained the team during the period.
The wages were £3 per week. That was early in the season. If we were going bad, it was reduced to 30 shillings per week. As a matter of fact, I played over 100 odd games, and I finished up getting £15 out the Provident Fund. That's, I don't know what happens these days. That's in contrast to what they get now.
10 years after Oakey's retirement, he joined the Essendon Football Club committee and served there for nearly 30 years. Despite the club hitting rock bottom in 1933, they secured the services of a player who was to become their second legend. His name was Dick Reynolds.
Dick Reynolds joined the club in 1933, and he showed excellent ability, as a matter of fact. And in 1934, he was good enough to win the Brownlow medal, so it shows you how good he was.
By 1939, Reynolds had won 3 Brownlow medals and had become captain coach of the club at the age of 25.
In 1939, Jack Baggett was sacked as coach, and the committee put the proposition to me to be joint coach with Harry Hunter, and we finished out the rest of the year as joint captain and coaches. I took over in 1940, and from there onwards, well, I look back on my career or history with the club, and I feel that it was just wonderful, although I didn't win enough premierships.
King Reynolds was to stay on as captain coach for a mammoth 12 seasons before becoming non-playing coach for another 10 years. He went on to win premierships in 1942, 1946, 49 and 1950. For the 5 years that Reynolds was captain coach, Essendon was never out of the 4, and the team only missed 2 grand finals between 1941 and 1951. This was an incredible turnaround for a team that had been in the doldrums for so long. After being beaten in the 1941 grand final by Melbourne, in 1942 there was another premiership flag unfurled at Essendon.
We went on in 1942, and I thought that was one of our, well, as far as I was concerned, it was a marvellous achievement to win my first grand final, to play the club, and that, although I've won Brownlow medals, I feel that winning the Premiership in 1942, that was the highlight of my career up till then anyway.
What Dick Reynolds didn't say was that the final score of 1918-132 was the highest score in any finals game to that date. And the King himself was undoubtedly best on the ground. 1946 saw the start of Essendon's rise again to a top league team.
In 1946, we won another flag, and that's something that'll never forget in my memory. The third quarter, I think we kicked about 11 goals, and we won that very convincingly. And after the game, I can always remember somebody said to me, "What happened today?" I says, "Well, I was out there today and it felt as though I was in a shopping rush." The Essendon players were in a shopping rush. They were running for goals, and it was just like a mad shopping rush to goals. And we won it easily, and that stuck out in my mind. It was unbelievable to win like we did that day.
Essendon won 3 great premierships in 1946, 1949 and 1950. They were in 6 grand finals in succession and could, with a bit of luck, have created a new record of 6 flags in a row.
In 1947, we played Carlton in the grand final, and I can even remember Stafford kicked that goal, and to my mind it could have been either a point or a goal, and anyway, they gave it a go. The goal umpire gave it a goal, and we lost by 1 point. The 1948 grand final was amazing. I'll never forget it. We kicked 7-27 and we drew with Melbourne. We did everything but kick goals that day, and well, in the replay it turned out we just ran out of legs or something, and we weren't a patch on ourselves the week before.
In the annual report to members for the 1948 season, Secretary Bill Cookson said that notwithstanding the excellent show, it's very apparent that no team is complete without a spearhead. 1949 saw John Coleman arrive on the football scene. Yes, those that had only heard of the great full forwards of the past at last gained an insight into just how good these old-timers were. But as good as they were, not one of the former stars hit the public with quite the same impact as the Essendon champion. Coleman amazed the football world by kicking 12 goals in his first match against Hawthorn, and he became the first player in history to score 100 goals and had the lead goal-kicking in his first year in league football. The 73-point victory over Carlton was a record-winning margin in a grand final, and the great Coleman kicked his 100th goal during the match. Hundreds of people had spilled over the fence to sit on the boundary line inside the oval, and he was cheered off the ground by ecstatic Essendon supporters. In 1950, the Dons continued to play brilliant football to win 19 out of their 20 home and away matches. They were brilliant in attack with men like Bill Snell and, of course, John Coleman. As well, they were strong and safe in defence, with the likes of Bill Brittingham, Roy McConnell, Norm MacDonald, Twinkle Toes we used to call him, and a great centre man and half-back flanker in Harold Lambert. They had top ruckmen in Bluey McClure and Chuka May, and excellent rovers in Dick Reynolds, of course, and Bill Hutchison. They thrashed side after side as they swept through the season. Essendon were head and shoulders above the rest of the sides in the competition. They had the most complete side fielded since the war. It was a great triumph for Dick Reynolds, who after playing for 17 years had decided that this was to be his last season as a player. In his first year as non-playing coach at Essendon, Reynolds nearly pulled off another premiership in 1951.
John Coleman, in the last game of the year, was suspended for striking Casper, and it's one of the things that, well, it was the biggest headache I can ever remember. I walked into the room at half-time, and John was half-dressed, in fact, three-quarter dressed, and on his way out and home. And I had to shut the door, I had to keep everybody out the room, and it took me about 10 minutes to dress. In fact, I think I remember having to put his Guernsey on and everything, and put his boots on and to finish. And I told him he had to go out there on the ground, he had to show Carlton and the Casper and everybody, you know, that he was he was still a force. And there's no doubt he went out in that second half and he won the game for us against Carlton. Unfortunately, we never had him in the grand final. If he'd been in the grand final, there's no doubt about it, we would have beaten Geelong fairly easy that day. That's my opinion.
The club went through a lean period, and on the first Saturday in June 1954, Essendon supporters were stunned when champion full forward John Coleman crashed to the ground after taking a mark against North Melbourne. The disastrous knee injury sustained at the age of 25 was to prevent him from playing football for Essendon ever again. In 5.5 years of senior football, his tally was 537 goals, and he headed the league's goal-kicking list on 4 occasions. His average was over 5 goals in every match. One name to feature among the best in the 1946 Premiership win was a young man called Bill Hutchison, who made his debut with Essendon earlier in the year. Hutchie became captain 5 years later, and the champion Little Rover won the Brownlow Medal in 1953 at the incredible age of 30. In 1957, Bill Hutchison retired, having played in a record 30 state sides. Hutchie represented Victoria in every year from 1946 to 1953 and was twice captain. Towards the end of the 50s, the club began to improve its position. With the help of players like John Gill, Jeff Leake and Hugh Mitchell, Essendon featured in the grand final in both 1957 and 1959. By 1961, John Coleman had returned to the club as coach, with Bill Hutchison as his deputy. The Dons had become known as the Gliders in the latter part of Dick Reynolds' reign, and it was decided that steps had to be taken to improve the overall performance of the team. But even the most optimistic Essendon supporters didn't expect a premiership by 1962. Champion centre-half forward Ken Fraser went in his 4th year at Essendon at the time.
It was quite refreshing in some ways to us as players to have a new coach. John Coleman had a different approach to coaching. He demanded more from us. He was willing to make more changes. He asked us to be a bit more aggressive, and I think we were. We responded to the challenges he gave to us, and 1962 was a magnificent year for the club. We ended up on top of the ladder at the end of the home and home series, and then went on to play Carlton in the grand final and had a magnificent match against Carlton. Highlighted, I think, by the brilliance of our small men. Jack Clark, who was captain of the side, a magnificently clever player, courageous, and he led the club superbly in that grand final. John Burt, another small player, one of our Rovers, again played a magnificent game to set up so many winning moves. We had a very strong half-back line, and we were just too strong for Carlton that day. 3 years later, I was fortunate enough to be made captain of the club in 1965 when Jack Clark retired as captain, and fortunately again we managed to just get into the final series. We ended up in 3rd spot, then played from the first semi-final and had a good win there, had a good win in the preliminary final against Collingwood, and then in the grand final against St Kilda, who'd never won a grand final and who were very anxious to win that grand final for the first time ever. We again played a magnificent match and were far too strong, and it was certainly the highlight of my career to hold up the Premiership club on Essendon Football Club's behalf in front of 100,000 people at the MCG.
As the 60s moved on, the players who'd led the club throughout the Premiership years moved into the veteran stage, and by 1968 John Coleman had stood down as coach to be replaced by the recently retired star Jack Clark. And Clark got the Bombers into the grand final in his first year. The Dons went down by only 3 points to Carlton, and an injury that put skipper Ken Fraser out of the grand final side could have cost the club a flag. The 1970s were mediocre years for Essendon. The decade got away to a bad start when a group of 5 players, Captain Don McKenzie, Barry Davis, Jeff Pryor, Darryl Gerlach and Jeff Gosper, all decided to strike over match payments. The club threatened to split wide open before the row was settled.
In 1969, following the grand final appearance in '68, we thought that we were in for a good season. But 5 of us thought that the unfairness to Rule 11, as far as the VFL was concerned, we tried to improve the situation as far as pay of payment was concerned. We did go on strike, but still wanted to play football with Essendon. Then we moved into the '70s. A number of coaches were tried, namely John Burt, Des Tuddenham, Bill Stevens and Barry Davis. John's 1 year of coaching had many problems. Possibly the disciplining of players in that particular year was a very hard job for John. Des Tuddenham came in '72 and was an excellent coach in as much as that we did make the finals in '72 and '73. But then when injuries started to hit him, he found it very, very difficult to coach from the sidelines, and not being able to coach by example, he also found it very, very difficult. Bill Stevens came along in '76 and '77 and groomed a number of players for the Essendon Football Club who are still playing now, namely Nagel, Watson, Hurd and Vanderhaar. He saw the potential of these chaps. Barry Davis, an excellent player, but also found it very, very difficult in the coaching field. In '76, of course, possibly one of the highlights as far as the decade was concerned, Graham Moss was captain of the side in '76 and was fortunate enough to win the Brownlow medal.
1981, a transformation occurred at Essendon. There was a new administration and a new coach. Kevin Sheedy burst onto the football scene with a vengeance.
Well, 1981 is my start of a career at coaching, and Essendon over the '70s and the late '70s in particular had been quite a potential sort of team. They had some good players in the team, and I felt that if I could get the job as coach, I felt that there was a rate of improvement that I could get out of the boys. And 1981 we had quite a good year, and we unfortunately dropped from out of the top 3 late in the season. We won 18 matches on end at one stint there during the season, and we got off to a poor start, which was unfortunate. But perhaps losing Neil Danaher was the worst thing that happened to Essendon in 1981, I would say, because 1981 was a year where we were hoping to get and do very well in the finals, and we lost an elimination final to Fitzroy. I think from the '81 list we'd lost about 28 players, and we've kept 14 of the players, which is a lot of turnover, and with Noel Junkins recruiting and Brian and Donahue, Kevin Egan and myself really working out what sort of philosophy we were going to take and the type of style of game that was needed to win a VFL Premiership after the club had not done so well for a number of years. We again got to the finals in '82, and unfortunately another elimination final loss to North Melbourne. 1983 was a year where we sort of got in, won our first final since 1968, just a finals match. And that was sort of a breakthrough for the club because it was such a drain losing 5 elimination finals. And I mean, I remember the people after the elimination final victory, God, I thought, you know, the world had sort of spun around and the club was terribly pleased to get through that game. And we progressed through to the grand final against Hawthorn, and which was naturally a shattering day for my players and our club and for me, naturally as a coach. To your first grand final as a coach, you're always naturally hoping for the obvious, and that's to win. But to be beaten badly and to lose by a poor margin was a great disappointment for everybody.
Any Bomber supporter who was down in the dumps about the 1983 grand final debacle must have been delighted as an extraordinarily committed Essendon side smashed through the Hawthorn defence to kick a record-breaking 9 goals, 6 behinds in the last quarter to storm away with the flag.
1984 was sort of a good year for us in recruiting and getting the best list of players available at Essendon since the previous Great Essendon signs.
To say that 1984 was sort of a good year for Essendon must be the understatement of the year. Because, Bomber supporters, bless you all, there are more great Essendon years to come. More very great years.
just keep punching them, Tom. That's all you're going to do. No, terribly pleased to hear you say that. And look, you know what it's like. You've been terrific with me on the past. What you've called me on.
We might start tonight by giving a version of the theme song, and on the tables, for those of you who just might have forgotten the words, are some sheets with the words of the song. We think you know it, but why don't we tell all of Melbourne what we think? Come on with the theme song. What about a big rousing cheer for the president of the Essendon Football Club, Greg Sill? Well,
thanks very much, Alan, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For some reason or other, I get the distinct impression that tonight is somewhat different to this time last year. Be upstanding and to drink the toast to not only the players that played today, but indeed to every player that's represented Essendon during the season 1984, together with all of the coaching panel and the match committee.
A much brighter, happier and cheerful speech than we gave in this room at this time last year. Our Premiership host, Sheedy.
Now you're going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight because I've been such a boring person at these sort of functions. I know how I can destroy a night very quickly. Very difficult to be an extrovert coach in a conservative community. I'd like to firstly start off with hoping that everybody enjoys tonight. It's been a very embarrassing 12 months, I can assure you. I suppose the first people that I would like to thank is the players that have played for Essendon this year and the 4 years that I have been here. The players have done a magnificent job, and to come back and play a 9-goal, 6 last quarter and win the grand final is a fantastic effort. I think that amongst the sort of atmosphere that we can really enjoy tonight, we shouldn't get carried away with ourselves, because really it's amazing, you know, really. I mean, fair dinkum, when a fisherman goes to really throw that line in, you come in hook, line and sinker every time, don't you? The players are the ones that win you the game. Don't ever worry about that. Your players are the players that go out there and get the score on the board, and if you win, you win, and you lose, you lose. But I would think that there are some people that I would like to thank for the 1984 season. I would just like to go through it very quickly. I'd like to thank the selectors that have worked very hard with myself. I'd like to thank, which is David Collins and Terry Danaher. Kevin Morris, who has been a tremendous assistant. We didn't win the Premiership this year, but we did. Gary Bryce, John Newman, Ken Fletcher. To me, you know, like the coaching panel is terribly important. Fred Lehman and Peter Power and Nick Neofito to get that boxing going is really good, isn't it? Eh? Get a bit of punch in your game every now and then. One of the greatest sort of people that I feel I have met since I've been at Essendon is Jackie Jones, and I'd like to thank Jackie Jones. Just thanks, Jack, for giving me a bit of a confidence every now and then, pal, you know, like, every now and then when the world seems to be against you, you just... To our staff has been wonderful, there's no doubt about that. I mean, working with a person like myself, for Kevin Egan, who was always on beck and call, a wonderful effort, Mitty. Thanks very much. We've booked you into the asylum next week, mate, so you can relax there.
Well, I think Alan says it all. I simply stand, irrespective of what our attitudes are elsewhere, speaking on behalf of supporters. And I say, Kevin, this is the greatest night of the year for us, and thank you. It's probably also the greatest gathering of football talent ever assembled in this hotel since Sheedy was here on his own. We wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but we may say it for another 5 or 50 years to come. But I also thank Kevin and the committee and the players and all associated directly with the club on behalf of supporters, which cover a range of people tonight, from, frankly, the greatest man to ever pull on an Essendon Guernsey like Dick Reynolds here tonight.
Just get the players up. Yeah, bring them all up. Okay. Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Alan. Gee whiz, hang on, I'm a better speech maker than that. Really, it was just a wonderful feeling to run off the ground and to realise we've sort of grabbed the Premiership for '84. I think that it hasn't really sunk into a lot of us just yet. It was just a tremendous thing to 40 out for 3 quarters. I thought Hawthorn started very well, and I guess, a full credit to us, we just kept chipping away and working, and eventually we made it all happen. But special I think special praise must be given to our coach, Kevin Sheedy, for he's done a pretty good job, and he's persevered with. You can't sort of build him up too high yet. He's going to be with us for a few years to come just yet. But I think that he's done a real good job, and he's persevered with the players that he's had at the club, for the times. Players such as myself, I've been dragged a few times, and been a few players that have sort of struggled a bit there for a while, but he's kept on with them, and with the likes of getting Doggett-Williams back into the club and and recruiting players with the likes of Leon Baker and Paul Weston and other players, into the club. They've all been bloody tremendous goers to us, and they've been really great. But there's one thing before I tune in for turn it in for the night, I'd just like to thank our number one supporter, and that's Mark the Phantom. He's a guy that I'll give him a clap. He's a tremendous guy. He turns up there training, and he's probably one of the guys responsible for getting us out there and winning. The players really love him, and also to our wives. I think they've got to put up with a hell of a lot, and they had throughout the year. I guess it's hard. It's a pity we couldn't sort of, pick 30 players to run out in the ground today. It's, as Kevin has already mentioned, with guys like Steve Carey and Tony Bahaja and Paul Seaman and my brother Neil and a lot of other players, Cameron Clayton, Rene King. You can go right on down through the list. Players that have played senior matches. I feel really sorry that we couldn't sort of actually fit them in there somewhere to get out there. I know we weren't able to do that, but I really feel a lot for those guys. They've been tremendous players for us at the club. And to everyone else, to the supporters, on behalf of the players, I thank you very much for sticking behind us, really, and giving, then 84's our year. Naturally enough, let's kick on. All right? Thank you.
Well, to say that 1984, as far as Essendon is concerned, was a sort of great year would probably be the understatement of the year. Because note this, as far as the Bombers are concerned, there are many more great years to come.
New brick. Bricks to build your dream on. Bricks in the same mould as Australia's early days. The New Brick Settlers range. Earthy, rich colours fired in kilns to these blends. The New Brick Settlers range. Pioneer bricks from New Brick. Around the world, terracotta roofing tiles have stood the test of time. New Brick. Terracotta roofing tiles come in so many permanent colours and good-looking shapes. No rust, no fading, no painting. Just good, rich terracotta colours. Time-tested New Brick terracotta roofing tiles.